Hello. I'm happy to share this message with you today. And the message is entitled, What Happened to Me? Trauma can occur during a lifetime, anyone's lifetime. And even though we're going to talk about adverse childhood experiences, it's important to know that there can be one event that is traumatic for you that will stop you in your tracks. So, this message isn't for just those who have adverse childhood experiences or have suffered PTSD because of some of the things that they've experienced. It's for anyone, any one of us who've had a life altering event. That could be the birth of a child, it could be a divorce, it could be moving. There are things that impact us as individuals differently. And one person's trauma is different from another person's trauma. And we don't judge about how traumatic something is. So let's explore this together. We're going to learn how adverse childhood experiences, historical trauma, implicit bias, racism, and environmental conditions impact academic success for children. But as we go along in this study, let's be mindful that we're also talking about the perspectives of a child, the adult, the parent, the caregiver, the teacher, or community member, because remember that children are healthiest when those that surround them in their lives are doing well and are healthy also. Ah, the wonder of childhood, the innocence of childhood, the ability to love, to not see differences in the way that adults do. But sometimes the wonder of childhood is averted because of the experiences that they have. Let's make it our mission to try to be as helpful to children generally in our lives, those that we have a responsibility to teach, those that we might encounter just by happenstance. Every encounter with a child holds within it the possibility to change a child's life for the good or the not so good. This is our granddaughter, Cameron. I try as much as I can to impart the principles that I'm going to talk to you about. And you'll see what I mean as I go along. Look at that face. Do you think she loves herself? I think she does. And so when we look at this picture of an adult walking along with a child, we have to remember again that we impact the lives of the children that we come in contact with. All children, this is what we want to believe and what we strive for, that all children live in safe, stable, and nurturing relationships and environments to protect child maltreatment and to assure that children reach their full potential. Safe, stable, and nurturing relationships and environments are important for adults as well. If you want to improve in major ways, change your frame of reference, change how you see the world, how you think about people, change your paradigm, your scheme for understanding and explaining certain aspects of reality. We all, whether we really think about it that much or not, we are in our own bubbles. We walk around in our own bubbles because we grow up in different households with different customs, with different beliefs, with different values, with different thoughts about what is real and what is not real. And we won't know what someone else is like unless we talk to them, unless we learn about them, unless we are willing to drop our own defenses and approach each person as valuable, approach each person as maybe perhaps they have something that I can learn regardless of who they are, even a child. Sometimes a child can bring forth so much wisdom, you wonder how in the world did they know that? And so we want to take the blinders off. This is a safe place. So let's be comfortable in what we're getting ready to talk about. I did a presentation for the PTA on racism and me, and this is important to this discussion as well. So I wanted to share just a little bit about that. We must understand our own beliefs, biases, privileges, and responses, and reflect on how we show up in the world for all children. When we think about privilege, we understand that privilege has to do with a special right, advantage, or immunity granted or available only to a particular person or group of people. Inequities, lack of fairness or justice, injustice, stereotypes, a real or imagined trait of an individual applied to a group, prejudice, a conscious or unconscious assignment of positive or negative value to traits of a group. And so privilege is something that we might think that everyone has. Everyone has the ability to succeed. Everyone has the ability to grow and understand and learn new things and to pull themselves up by their bootstraps and become who they want to be in life. Is it that way for all children? Is it that way for all adults? And when you think about it, it's not the case for everyone. But there's certain things that happen in individuals' lives that impact the way that they grow up, that impact the way that children respond, react. And the first thing that we don't want to do is to label a child as being bad or even saying that they come from a bad home because we don't know that. Well, we may have the information based on what's in a person's documents, but we really don't know unless we look at the person as a whole. And so when we think about implicit bias, these are some of the triggers or some of the ways that we may perceive others to be, children or adults. We may tend to judge people based on what we perceive as their ability. We may have thoughts about their gender, their ethnicity, their sexuality, their skin tone, their age. And as a senior citizen now, that age thing kind of gets to me a little bit. Religion, race, and class. And so these may be the ways that we have our implicit bias sunglasses on, and we see people based on these biases that we may have. And we may have biases against ourselves. Just like I said about the age thing, well, I'm happy to be a senior citizen and to have gotten to the age that I am. And so if I were not comfortable about my age, then I might have had a little difficulty with it. As for all of these things that you see, so we can perceive these things as being problematic for others or ourselves. So let's think about that as we look at people, think about people, um, uh, judge people as a group. We can't judge people as a group. Well, we can, but we shouldn't because everyone within any group is an individual and they have differences no matter who they are. So a very difficult subject to talk about is racism. And racism is something that's pertinent in the news today. And you may be wondering why it's such a big issue. Well, that's for another day. I wish we had time to talk about it now because I do a whole history on what happened to us as Black people. But I want to share a little bit with you about the science in regards to racism because it is connected to trauma. When you look at this picture, it was a random picture that I got from Shutterstock. When you look at this picture, what do you notice about the young man? I'm going to give you a second. So, unfortunately, Black youth are seen as adults and they are judged as adults. Their misbehaviors are crimes where white children, oh, it's just growing up. They made a mistake. But this picture is of children of the same age. The white children, boys, look vulnerable. They look, you know, kind of innocent, one would say. But the way that the young man in the yellow appeared looks like he's angry. And the young man in the orange shirt is husky, and he looks like he could, really cause some trouble if he beat someone up. I asked this question of folks in my coalition to help us understand that we don't want to, that we may walk across the street when we see a Black youth or Black youths together. And so we just have to be aware of that. I'm not saying to put yourself in danger, but what I'm saying is that there is not a reason to handcuff a 6-year-old, regardless of what that 6-year-old has done. And this is a true story. A 6-year-old was found to have marijuana, excuse me, marijuana in his backpack. Now, oh, and the reason that they found out about it was because it was at school and the child took it out and said, "This is weed." And the children were gathering around and so the question, well, what is weed? And so because it was a crime, 6 years old now, the little, they said, "What do you do with it?" He said, "I don't know." So obviously the child, African American child, had no intention of smoking the weed, didn't know what to do with it, and obviously he had got it from someone else, home, I don't know. And so they put that little child in handcuffs and arrested him. That wasn't necessary. And so that's what I'm talking about, this instant thought that if it's a Black child, then something must be wrong. It's interesting that the Association of Pediatricians, American Association of Pediatrics, excuse me, wrote that they believe that racism is a social determinant of health that's passed down through generations. This is a different way of looking at racism. And so they spoke to 67,000 pediatricians who agreed that there is bias in how they approach a child, understanding that racism is an issue. And so they said that pediatricians should be prepared to counsel families on their exposure to racism and to make their clinics as welcoming to all groups as possible. It also calls for pediatricians to examine their own biases and address them. A pediatrician is a trusted member of the family. Well, that's the way it was when I was growing up. And it was the family doctor that was the pediatrician. And when I couldn't talk to my mom and dad, or didn't want to talk to my mom and dad about something that I was feeling, I could go to Dr. Dobson and I could talk to him about it. But that familial family kind of relationship doesn't necessarily find its way to us as a society today. And therefore, this warning was sent out. Racism. Ask the child about these things, because these things not only impact the child, impact the family. Let me read to you some things that the report also says. The report also says that depression, obesity, worsened sleep, high rates of doctor visits, and lower self-esteem among children who are exposed to racism. From 0 to 36 months of age, children are aware of the sights and sounds and environments of their caregivers' emotional states, and that their perception of safety is linked to the perceived safety of their caregivers. So we have to be careful about who is caring for our children. In ages 3 through 5, children in this age range may exhibit behaviors in response to trauma that can include recreating the traumatic events or having difficulties with sleeping, appetite, or reaction to loud sounds or sudden movements. So with young children, to ask what happened in school today, what happened in nursery today, we may have to act out some things that may have occurred, such as saying no hitting, no hitting, and then we may have played back to us a scenario where they felt in danger or something was uncomfortable. And that's something that we have to speak to their caregiver about. In ages 6 to 11, school-age children tend to view media coverage in a personal way, worrying that a similar event could happen to them. This can lead to distractibility and problems in school. Well, we know that we're not particularly in school because of COVID-19, but there's a lot on the news that it's difficult for adults to unpack. Let's make sure that we're creating a safe space for children by not allowing them to see the rerun of all of the negative news. In ages 12 to 17, youth in this age range typically have a better understanding of events. They're also often still forming their identities and their views of the world. High school age students may use substances to cope or deal with the anxiety that they are feeling as a result. So helping children, all children and even ourselves, process racially traumatic events, we have to practice self-care. We may not even realize how we are stopped and stunted, and how emotionally involved we are until we stop letting ourselves, yes, address those things that we can address, be involved at whatever level we can be involved in. But watching things over and over and over and over again, just like with children, it hurts them. It puts them in a vulnerable, unsafe feeling place. And so we have to be careful about that for ourselves. We have to make sure that we're maintaining our own routines and that we do that for our children. Now's not the time to have them sleep late, go to bed late. They need routines, and so do we. So we'll talk about adverse childhood experiences because this is what's most common to us. In adverse childhood experiences, these are experiences that a child, if they experience 4 or more of these things before their 18th birthday, then they can be subject to possibly risky outcomes later on in life. So if a child, again, experiences 4 or more, and it doesn't matter which 4 they are, of these ACEs, 4 or more, abuse, physical, emotional, or sexual, neglect, physical or emotional, household dysfunction, mental illness in the home, incarcerated relative, mother treated violently, substance use or divorce within the home or separation, 4 or more before one's 18th birthday. Again, it doesn't matter which 4. We may see 4 of them as being worse than the others, but it doesn't make any difference when it pertains to the compound effect of any of the 4. And so these are the possible outcomes: lack of physical activity, smoking, alcoholism, drug use, missed work, severe obesity, diabetes, depression, suicide attempts, STDs, heart disease, cancer, stroke, COPD, and broken bones or broken bones. And so when someone appears to have these difficulties, before we think about what's wrong with them, what did they do, we need to think about what happened to them, what happened to me, what happened to you. Why is it that you want to get up and jog and do all the things that you need to do in order to be healthy, but you just can't? Or you feel like you're stuck, you just can't. It could be because of adverse childhood experiences. If there is overuse of alcohol, if people smoke, if there's drug use, if they miss work, even chronic disease can find its roots in adverse childhood experiences, not because of what you do, but because of what happened to you. So I want you to look at the purple bar because that is the indicator of 4 or more ACEs. Early smoking initiation, current COPD, current smoking, more prevalent with 4 or more ACEs. HIV, you can see that for yourselves, injected drugs, 50 or more intercourse partners, ever had an STD, consider self an alcoholic, ever attempted suicide, sexually assaulted as an adult. And women were asked this question. Intercourse by age 15, teen pregnancy, teen paternity, 4 or more ACEs. Work problems, job problems, financial problems, absenteeism, 4 or more ACEs. Sadly, life expectancy is an issue as well. And if there's chronic disease, or if someone is not taking care of themselves, then 0 ACEs can look to 80 years of age, while 6 or more ACEs can mean 20 years earlier loss of life. And so we want to make sure, now that we've heard this, because it is a shock, it's shocking. And you may even be thinking about how ACEs has played a part in your life. And I will say to you that the reason that this subject is so important to me, and I will talk to one person, I will talk to 100 people or 1,000, is because my score is 9. And about in 2014, I began looking at this. That's when I took my adverse childhood experience test. And I realized that subconsciously, because you're not aware of how it's impacting you, you just realize that, there's some things that are kind of difficult, but you can't put a name to it. Well, we put a name to it today. And then I realized that there were certain positive things that happened in my life that caused me to be able to recover and even recover my childhood. And we're going to talk about that. And of course, this takes an economical toll in terms of all these things: criminal justice system, child welfare, special education, healthcare, and lost productivity. Children who are a victim of adverse childhood experiences, neglect, or abuse exhibit antisocial behaviors, suffer from anxiety and depression, encounter challenges in school, and abuse drugs or alcohol. When we look at the way that violence plays itself throughout the life spectrum, this is what we see. If these things happen in childhood, child maltreatment, physical, sexual, emotional, or neglect, what does that sound like, right? It sounds like adverse childhood experiences. Then by the time the child gets to adolescence, you see violence, bullying, gang-related activities, fights. You see suicidal behavior, teen dating violence, sexual violence. And then if resilience hasn't caught on, and if these children aren't rescued by this time, then later in life, violence continues, suicide behavior continues, intimate partner violence continues, teen dating, sexual violence, and elder abuse occurs. So we want to make sure that we nip this in the bud, so to speak. And this is one of the saddest charts that I've seen. These are children that are in youth development centers. And see the largest pink bar that's out there that says 89%? Well, that's trauma and stressor related disorders among females that are in youth development centers. Young men say 24%, but I know you think just like me that they just didn't answer the question. And then we see conduct disorder, but that's related to trauma. And then there's something that is true that has to do with cannabis related disorders. And I don't have time to talk to you about that today, but I will say that the new marijuana has been found to cause schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, usually happening later in life, but those disorders take a while to manifest. And so cannabis-related disorders are also prevalent in youth that are in youth development centers. Next, I want to talk about what do I see? What we see and what we experience in our environment is really important. We may not really understand how different this is for some people, so let's look at this. We have an unhealthy tree and a healthy tree. In the unhealthy tree, what we see in the environment, so it's the built environment and not the person. And you begin to see how these things pile up, pile up, pile up, until this trauma really causes a person to be unhealthy and unproductive. So we're talking about lack of social capital, lack of mobility, poor air and water quality, substandard schools, violence, poverty, lack of jobs, substandard wages, poor housing quality, unaffordable housing, public housing environment. The built environment has no grocery stores, no banks, no dine-in restaurants, no sidewalks, parks are in need of repair, more alcohol outlets, and more tobacco shops. Now, with that kind of environment, what do you expect to happen with the tree? The tree is not going to be healthy. And if we have the opposite of what I just read, then the tree will produce healthy leaves and be healthy. So if a child lives in an area that I described in my reading, then they have a more difficult time in exceeding than a child that has all of these possibilities. And they're not even possibilities that are beyond the realm of understanding. Everyone should have access to transportation. Everyone should live in an environment that doesn't have a convenience store selling alcohol on every single block or tobacco shops. If I showed you an image of McDonald's, you would immediately think about the Golden Arches. If I asked you to think about Starbucks coffee, you could recognize the image. That's because of advertising and how it bombards us. And that's what happens with these environmental things that aren't good. So we have to understand that if it's hard for us to not have to have Starbucks, even though there are other brands of coffee, we need to understand that children are influenced by what they see. And what I mean is, if you go into a convenience store or gas station, probably the first thing that you see is alcohol. And the alcohol can be consumed by adults. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with adults consuming alcohol in moderation. That's not the point. The point is that if children walk in there to get their candy or get their juice, they're going to walk past alcohol. Alcohol, 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 beer, 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 milk. And so that does have an impact on them as well. So what are the neighborhood risk factors for youth violence? That's what the YV stands for, and that's what we're talking about today. Neighborhood poverty, high alcohol outlet density, community violence, lack of economic opportunities, low neighborhood support or cohesion. That's just what I read to you, right? So if we want to prevent youth violence as it pertains to trauma, as it pertains to the children that we have or children that we come in contact with or children in our classrooms, then this is where they may be coming from. And we can help them by looking at ways to decrease some of the impact of these things on their lives. One of the neighborhood protective factors for youth violence, community support and connectedness. I was thinking about how to engage parents and community in the school. And of course, there's outside activities that we might be able to have, but bringing children and teachers together in a non-school fashion. Have a barbecue, have a party. One of the things that we've been doing is to have Zoom parties and inviting parents. So we have an elementary school Zoom dance, a middle school Zoom dance, a high school Zoom dance. And it has been so wonderful to see families dancing together, laughing and having fun. And this is a way that we can have community connectedness in these times, and then think about doing that when times are not as challenging as they are now. These are individual protective factors: family support and connectedness, connection to a caring adult, association with pro-social peers, connection or commitment to school, skills solving problems non-violently. So these are the things that we can look at in terms of making sure that the behaviors that we want to see are resilient behaviors, and we'll talk more about that in detail in just a moment. And so, I want us to pour into ourselves and pour into each other. I would love to be there with you, because I wouldn't talk nonstop. I'd have time for you to interject and to make comments, and it could be a real conversation among us. What are we afraid of as adults? Hmm. I want to read this to you from Marianne Williamson. Usually they attribute it to someone else, but it's a poem by Marianne Williamson. Our greatest fear, it is our light, not our darkness, that most frightens us. Our deepest fear is not that we are inadequate. Our deepest fear is that we are powerful beyond measure. It is our light and not our darkness that most frightens us. We ask ourselves, who am I to be brilliant, gorgeous, talented, and fabulous? Give yourself, give yourself permission to be brilliant, gorgeous, handsome, talented, and fabulous. Actually, who are you not to be? You are a child of God. Your playing small does not serve the world. There's nothing enlightened about shrinking so that people won't feel insecure around you. We were born to make manifest the glory of God that is within us. It's not just in some of us, it's in everyone. And as we let our own light shine, we unconsciously give other people permission to do the same. As we are liberated from our own fear, our presence automatically liberates others. Liberates others. Your light, my light. Let's let our light shine. Now, I know you've seen this because, you know, when you're on the airplane and we hear the information about, you know, if something happens to the oxygen, then the oxygen mask comes down, and put it on yourself before trying to help others. Now, see, that's a surprise, because a person that has high ACEs is always trying to solve someone else's problem. Not being a busybody, but maybe it's because we were so helpless and unable to help ourselves. Then our first reaction is, can I help you? And so we have to practice helping ourselves. So here are some protective factors to think about. Resilience to stress, social connections, child development knowledge, our own development knowledge, concrete supports in crisis, parent-child attachment. So let's look at some of these things in more detail. Resilience is not a trait that people either have or don't have, but it's something that can be learned, behaviors that can be learned by almost anyone. And that's what I remember as I think about my road to resilience. There's not anyone who's perfect. There's not anyone who's strong all the time. Be kind to yourself. Be easy on yourself, because life gets hard. And if there are times that we cry, crying doesn't last always. And so don't be so hard on yourself and thinking that you have to be perfect and that perfection means strong. Let's see. So here we go. This is the first place to start. Let's start with negative thoughts. We have to shred them. I don't know how many of you have heard a voice when you wake up in the morning that says, you are fantastic and you're going to do great things today. You're not going to fail in one single area of your life. No, the negative thoughts that come to you say, you're not going to make it. This is not going to work. You'll never get a promotion. I mean, whatever those things are. But do you know you don't have to pay attention to them? And it's really important to teach children that they don't have to pay attention to those voices. but we have to learn that we don't have to pay attention to them either. So we're going to shred negative thoughts, step one. And then um, we're going to think about home. Now, home, if it's the place where the abuse took place, then home is not a happy thought. You don't have to invite abusers back into your life, but you do need to forgive. You do need to let it go. You do need to make sure that now that you know about adverse childhood experiences and you understand where the hurt came from, you have to cut the anchor, because that pain and that trauma will try to keep you down. And if your home wasn't a happy home, then do you know that you can build it? You can build it if you let people into your life, let people into your heart. Don't be so afraid that everyone is going to hurt you. Don't be so afraid that no one cares about you. And think about that for us as adults, but think about how that weighs on a child. You know, it can be one word positively spoken to a child that they will hold on to and carry for the rest of their lives. So be careful about the things that you say to your students, to the children in your life. Be careful of the words that you say to the adults in your life. Be careful of how you speak to yourself. Say kind things to yourself. It'll be easier to say kind things to others. So we have to live every day with intention. Be intentional about the way that you live. And that means that you're going to think about what you do. You're going to have a schedule. You're going to have a guide in life, meaning that if there's chronic disease, which usually has to do with food, or it may have something to do with food, then you're going to make it a daily habit to eat certain things, because comfort food feels good. That's why it's called comfort food. And you can have comfort food once a week, as long as it doesn't make up for the whole week when you didn't have comfort food. But intentionally do things that lead to your health and wellness. School and family connections in adolescence are linked to positive health outcomes in adulthood. And so high school students, this is a national survey, showed that 32% of children in high school persistently felt sad or hopeless. 9%, well, let me skip that. 19% rather have been bullied at school. 14% have misused prescription pain medication. 17% have seriously considered attempting suicide. When I saw the statistic about suicide attempts, then it took me back to my teenage years. And as I said, my score is 9. I can't reduce that score. My resilience has taken over that score. And I actually attempted suicide twice when I was 14. But I had food every day. I had clothes on my back. My parents were not poor. Uh, so what I'm saying is that children do not have a way to express or have an outlet for the pain that they feel. And so why not just die? What is death to a child? I mean, how does that even make sense? Did I know someone who attempted suicide? Not that I can remember, um, but a negative thought said, do this. And if it hadn't been for my little brother who barged in to the bathroom, then I possibly would not be here today. And when it comes to the impact that adults, positive role models, have on a child's life, just remember that you, the time that a child grows up is, let's say we're talking about age 5 to 17. How many encounters with adults that are really meaningful take place? And that can be long lasting. Well, I'll tell you how that worked for me. So we got sent to a church youth group on Friday evenings. It was wonderful. I loved every single minute of it. And there was a young couple, I'll never forget them, that they used to make the salad because we had a meal. And they would just, oh, I love you so much, smoochy, smoochy, hug, hug. And that was not what it was like in my home, even though there were two parents there. And I looked at them and I took a picture, click, click. I took many pictures in my childhood that began to frame for me what my life would be. I was determined that that is what my life would be. And if my husband were sitting here right now, he would say that our 49 years together have been the best years of his life. Well, you know, I mean, in 49 years, if it's been wonderful every day, you know that you can't believe anything that I have said during this discussion. But what I am saying is that those small encounters can really be meaningful for the whole life of a child. So let's make it a point to, how are you today? I mean, anything that will show them that they're cared for and loved. Ah, I love this. Every child needs at least one adult who is irrationally crazy about him or her. And that was my grandmother for me. Um, she was wonderful to me. And she passed away when I was 7 years old. But she used to let me hold on to her apron as she went around doing her chores in Hartsville, South Carolina. But what I remember, and I can still hear, is that when there were thunderstorms in the evening and I was afraid of thunder and lightning, she would sit me on her lap in a rocking chair and she would hum this little tune to me that I could still hear in my ear from when I was 7 years old. And that's when she passed away. And I was in the room with her when she passed away. And she said to me, Wanda, you're not going to see me again. No, no, no. She said, Wanda, don't cry when I go away because you will see me again. And just remember that you are beautiful. And when you grow up, you're going to be somebody special. Well, those are the words that I needed to hold on to for my whole life. I'm beautiful. I'm going to be somebody when I grow up. Oh, and here they are. One of the things that we need to celebrate are those who are in our lives. Well, in the upper right-hand corner, that's my grandmother and my grandfather. I got on my grandfather's nerves so badly. He would just tap when I came around because I was a loud and vivacious child, and he just didn't know what to do with me. But my grandmother, there's the rocking chair. My grandmother just loved me so much, and I loved her. And that little baby is me with my mom. And then the big picture on the right are all my aunts and uncles who sadly have all passed away now. But the two youngest who are in the bottom at center, my Aunt Vernetta and my Uncle Purvis, were my absolute favorites. They were my mom and dad. To the right is that stately looking gentleman, and just behind him is my mom as well. So I enjoyed a wonderful time when we went to visit them when we were sent to South Carolina in the summers. Anyway, what I wanted you to know about this is that the 1940 census is online now. And so the ages of everybody in the family, and it's free, is listed on that census. And so you see my grandfather, who was 50 years old then, my grandmother, and all my siblings, all their children, and the siblings are listed there. And it just did my heart good to be able to see their names and where they were at the time. So enjoy your heritage. You are more than the worst thing that ever happened to you. Remember that, please. You are more than the worst thing that ever happened to you. So we're coming close to the end, and I want to leave you with some real tips, hoping that you can take them into consideration. Now, when I talk about these things, we're talking about what children need in order to grow up healthy, caring, and responsible. But there are things that we as adults can include in our lives. So remember, you can build it. Support. This is family support, positive family communication, other adult relationships, caring neighborhoods, caring school climate. Parents are involved in schooling. For adults, we can look at family life as being positive. We can have other adult relationships that are positive, and we can do things in our caring neighborhood. Empowerment. Community values youth as resources. Youth see themselves as having service to others, and safety within, feel safe at home and in the community. Boundaries and expectations. We need boundaries, even as adults. Family boundaries, school boundaries, neighborhood boundaries, adult role models, positive peer influence, and we can have high expectations of ourselves. Constructive use of time, creative activities, youth programs, religious community, time at home. And it looks like I have less than 5 minutes to go. I wish I could spend a little bit more time with you. Commitment to learning, achievement motivation, school engagement, homework, bonding to school, reading for pleasure, caring for positive values, caring, equality, and social justice, integrity, honesty, responsibility, and restraint, social competencies, planning and decision-making, interpersonal competence, cultural competence, resistance skills, peaceful conflict resolutions, and positive identity, personal power, self-esteem, sense of purpose, and a positive view of our personal future, and an enjoyment of our culture also. And so these are the things that really make a difference in a child's life. The research says that if children have some of these things, they don't have to have all of them, but let's say one of those in each of the categories, then they most likely will grow up healthy, strong, without using drugs or practicing any form of self-harm. And I want to leave you with this. And this is something that I pretty much live my life by, and it's called Ubuntu. There was an anthropologist who had been studying the habits and culture of remote African tribe. He had been working in the village for quite some time, and the day before he was to return home, he put together a gift basket filled with delicious fruits from around the region and wrapped it in a ribbon. He placed the basket under a tree, and then he gathered up the children in the village. The man drew a line in the dirt, looked at the children, and said, "When I tell you to start, run to the tree, and whoever gets there first will win the basket of fruit." When he told them to run, they all took each other's hands and ran together to the tree. Then they sat around the tree together around the basket and enjoyed their treat as a group. The anthropologist was shocked. He asked why they would all go together when one of them could have won all the fruits for themselves. A young girl looked up at him and said, "How can one of us be happy if all the other ones are sad?" And that is what Ubuntu means. And so we are here together and learning together, understanding that we may have had some troubles in our lives, some difficulties, really, really terrible difficulties, or even what some would consider minor difficulties. But whatever those difficulties are, please take some of the things that I've talked about today to heart. Learn to love yourself, and it's okay to put yourself first. If you're not here to help others, then that's no good to anyone. But most importantly, I don't want you to just exist. I want you to thrive. I want you to have joy. I want you to be successful. I want you to be able to look in the mirror and say, you know, you're doing really well. I like you. And so as we continue on our way to do better, be better for ourselves and those that are around us, I wish you much success. If there are any questions that you have, since we couldn't interact like I wanted to, here's the information about me. Again, Dr. Wanda Boone. You can call me Wanda. My number is 919-491-7811, and I will pick up the phone. My email address is wanda.durhamtry@gmail.com. Thank you so much. I can't see you, but I feel like I'm holding you in your heart, in my heart. And so hopefully I can see you one day in person. All right. Bye for now.